don't take no for an answer. It's like trying to get yourself published or anything else, right? You're going to get a lot of no's along the way, but eventually you're going to find some unit that will say yes.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they are taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
Hey, pilot, what's up? It's Nick. I am so stoked you're here with me today. Today, we are talking to Aaron Bohl, who is a B-52 pilot. And if you have ever thought about wanting to fly B-52s, this is a cool episode for you. You can hear his story all about what he did, what it took to convert. He used to be a Marine helicopter pilot, and he switched over to flying the B-52, which is fun as can be. I mean, 8 engines, man. The newest one is like 60-something years old. It's a hell of a plane. And they're just going to keep flying that thing, keep putting new engines on it, keep putting new wing spars, and just keep flying these things. It's really amazing. It's quite an aircraft. And it's a fun story. Aaron's so articulate, so engaging, and he just kind of walks us through what it takes. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, let me know. Send me an email, podcast@spitfireelite.com. I'd love to hear from you. Sit back, enjoy the show. And last but not least, let's have a quick word from our sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't have this awesome podcast. Hey, pilot, it's Nick. I want to tell you about a great friend of the show, Timothy P. Pope. He's a financial planner, and he's completely focused on the professional pilot. He's the kind of guy you want to go to for real talk to help you figure out your financial future. With so many upgrades and so many transitions and so many things going on, you owe it to yourself to give him a call. He'll help you design and execute really smart financial planning strategies, whether it's retirement planning, investment management, military transition, tax planning. He's a great financial planning partner. Timothy P. Pope, CFP, helping professional pilots make the most out of life. Give him a shout. All the information's in the show notes. You should definitely tell him I told you to call. All right, everybody, here we are. We have a real treat with us today on the Ready for Pushback podcast. I have my friend Aaron Bohl. Aaron is a B-52 pilot. He used to be in the United States Marine Corps, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what it's like to get to the Air Force and how to get into flying B-52s, even if you've never done it before. So, Aaron, thanks for joining us, man. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here and doing good.
Awesome, man. Now, you did not fly B-52s in the Marine Corps, right?
Nope. Turns out I took a non-standard pipeline, which is the old Cobra to B-52 track. It's non-standard across the DoD, but yeah.
So you started out life flying Cobras, flying helicopters in the Marine Corps, doing tons of pull-ups, super stoked about pull-ups, right?
Super stoked, yeah.
Super stoked. And then when did you transition over to the B-52?
So I transitioned over in 2012 was when I separated from the Marine Corps and made the switch and joined the Air Force Reserve. It's kind of interesting that the pipeline that I went through when I separated, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I had to have a 1-day break in service. So I was Mr. Bohl for 24 hours before I jumped over to the Air Force Reserve. And they said it was something to do with jumping from one service from an active service of another branch to the reserve component of another branch. And so I don't know, I'm assuming George Washington way back when set in stone, thou shalt do this. So that's why I had to do that.
Yeah, it's probably so they can mess up your pay on both sides. So the Marines can mess it up and the Air Force could mess it up. That's usually
exactly.
How it goes.
Absolutely.
For the pilot that's listening, right, we've got Aaron is a Marine who transitioned over. We're also going to be talking about the civilian side of the house and transitioning over. So no matter what your background is, this will be useful for you because you'll get a clearer understanding of what the process is and what it looks like and what the commitments are, because that's the trickiest part. There's so many unknowns. Unless you live in one of these locations where they've got a military base and they've got maybe somebody in your family's there. Other than that, unless you've met a buddy or something, like who knows? You have no idea how to do it. So Talk to me about how you dug up from being in the Corps, from flying in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, and doing close air support. And now you're like, you know what? I want to get moving and get going to the B-52 because that's for me. How did you figure that out?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get to fly in Afghanistan, unfortunately, in the Cobra, actually out on the ship. And nothing will make you want to join the Air Force more than being underway for long periods of time. And so I tell everybody it's really fun for the first 2 weeks, but then after that, you realize you're on a prison ship that you can't escape. But you're there with some of your best friends. So that's what makes it bearable, right?
Prison's great with buddies.
Yeah, exactly. Less shanking involved. But yeah, so honestly, it kind of just started with a dream of, I knew there was a process to do it. I kind of, like probably a lot of your listeners, I had no idea how to get it done. And so like most things, you just network, right? And so it started out with me just reaching out to my dad of all people. And he happened to know someone on base who connected me with someone else on base that happened to be in the kind of newly formed combat coded B-52 reserve unit at Barksdale Air Force Base. And so just through kind of a chain of emails, I got in touch with them and said, hey, here's my desire. And obviously I wasn't in a place to interview because I still had about 2 years left on my commitment with the Marine Corps. That initial starting the conversation. So when I got back from deployment, I reconnected. And then they said, hey, we'd love to have you come out for an interview. And so I was kind of, my Marine Corps career was kind of continuing on and just switched positions post-deployment. But then I found time to fly on my own dime, right? Turns out to my hometown and got connected with the hiring team there and went through the interview process. And the interesting part about that process is it's formal and yet very informal too. It's very fraternal is the way I would describe it, in the sense that you kind of meet with the unit because they want to know, are you a right fit? Do you kind of meld with everybody on the team already in the squadron? Because when they hire you, in some instances, you'll be in the unit for maybe the rest of your military career. I'll give you a case in point. In my squadron now, we just retired a gentleman who had to retire because he was 60 years old, had over 12,000 hours flying the B-52. So yeah, so when they commit to you, it can be for a very long time. And so they really want to get to know you, know what you're like, know what you're going to be like on a TDY, and know what you're going to be like in the squadron. And so that was really the first step, was getting the interview and then meeting with the team and getting the job offer from them.
First off, the guy who's 60, hats off to him. Like sticking around like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure he loved every second of it. And I'm sure being 60, he was pretty disappointed to have to leave.
He absolutely was. Yeah. I told him he can come hang around the squadron as often as he wants. Yeah.
He just like sell cigarettes in the G-Dunk or something like that. Yeah, for sure, man. What a guy. I love that. And you know what? He's still younger than all the newest B-52, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. By a couple of years. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The B-52 has been on the road for a couple days now, and they're going to refit it now too, I read.
Yeah. I tell everybody all the time, I'm like, the last Civil War veteran was alive when it was entering the Air Force, and the last B-52 pilot has not been born yet. So
it's true. It's like, that's not made up. That's absolutely true. Isn't that crazy? Golly, man, I love that. Okay, so you're on the ship, you start doing some emails, you start doing networking, and you find out that there is a need and they are interested. And the paperwork that you have to get together, right? Did they send you an email like, hey, here's the list of things we're looking for? Did you have to kind of like peel an onion to do it? Like, how did you figure that out?
It's interesting, and I'd like to tell you, I'm hoping that it's more streamlined by now. I thought getting the job was going to be the most challenging part, but once I kind of realized, like, hey, I gelled well with this unit, great group of guys, people I'm still friends with and fly with to this day, then I got into, it was basically like the unit says, we want you. Here's a letter that says we intend to hire you. Here's the position in the squadron you're going into. Now go meet with the recruiter, and now it's more of an interaction between you and the Air Force officer, accessions recruiter. And that's kind of where they hand off. And so then you have touch points back to their hiring official, who then has kind of touch points to the commander if they need to get involved to help streamline any processes or work any specific paperwork. But at that point, it's kind of a handoff to you and the recruiter. And some recruiters have a depth of knowledge with this, and then some do not. And so I would say the key differentiator for me was I got connected with Master Sergeant Higgins, who was just an exceptional officer accessions recruiter who had done this numerous times with Marines to Air Force. So he kind of knew the process. And then the other thing that I would say was pivotal to success is my good friend, James Brown. He's really why I'm in the Air Force today, because he was that kind of person who paid it forward and walked me through the process and took my phone calls when I was frustrated. And it was really funny how he had just learned the process very well and kind of knew each stage along the way. And so he had done the frog to C5 transition. And so he'd kind of seen all of the challenges along the way. And so, when I would call him pretty much every time with some kind of challenge, it would be, be like, hey, here's what you need to do to get through that. And once again, the connection between him was just through the Marine Corps kind of bro network, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. And so on the military side of the house, right, knowing those networks is really important. So with the recruiter, right, you've got your recruiter. And so from what I understand, it's like step one, get in touch with the squadron, find out where those touch points are. So if you don't have a network in and you're doing it from the outside, is there a way to get in touch with the squadron?
Yeah, so there's actually a website, and I haven't used it or looked at it a while, but there used to be a website called Bogey Dope, and I believe it's still in operation now, but they did a really excellent, and when I was going through the process, it was not in existence to my knowledge. When I was going through, it was called baseops.net, and then I think Bogey Dope is the later evolution of that. And also, I Googled it today, and I would highly encourage, especially if you're going from gold to silver, I would Google gold to silver transition, and pretty much the base ops PDF pops up. It's the number one search in Google, and it is a step-by-step process of exactly everything we're talking about. And what was interesting was as I went through the process, and I believe it was written by a Harrier pilot many moons ago who did that Harrier to tanker conversion, but it walks you through this whole process. And there was many times it would be like, nope, that's not the right way to do it. The recruiter would say that. And then I was like, this document here is saying this is how you do it. And it turned out in the end, the recruiter called me like, oh, yep, you were right. And so the document is still very relevant to this day, probably somewhat different, but in the military, a lot of things really don't change over time.
Yeah, for sure. Once the process is set, the only reason they change it is so somebody can get promoted.
Right. But to that point, though, like the website Bogey Dope, what it would do, it had this really cool overlay where you could select like airline bases and then aircraft type, location. And then within each of those, it would show who's hiring. And if not, historically, who is their hiring point of contact. And so you could click on that site and find out who that person is. And then the biggest two things that initially wasn't translated to me was you're looking between the rated and non-rated. And rated is basically in the Air Force, everyone that has wings presently, right? Whether that's an NFO or a naval aviator or an Army aviator, they identified those as rated. So that's a different type of board. That's someone saying, hey, we're going to assess you into our unit midway through a career. And then there's the non-rated track, which I'm sure we'll talk to, which is the person off the street, person out of a ROTC program that basically wants to join the reserves from the outset, and that the reserves will own and purchase their commitment, if you will, while going through flight school.
Got it. So I'm going to put Bogey Dope's website in the show notes so that can be there for perpetuity's sake. So the key here is to get your stuff in order, figure out what you're interested in. You can use the website to figure out where maybe you're hired by an airline, maybe you're not, maybe you're thinking about it, or you've targeted a place you want to live. It is probably pretty advantageous to live near the unit that you are going to be drilling with. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say, in my perspective, now as a squadron commander and someone who does hiring regularly, that the biggest advice I could tell anybody when sitting down with the unit is, and I forget exactly how the little mantra goes, but it's basically like, if you don't live near your airline base or you don't live near your reserve squadron, you're commuting away from your family, you're not going to make any of those three happy, right? So you kind of got to pick one. And so to me, the gold standard is live by your reserve unit first, or guard unit. Live by them first. Wait for the pay and quality of life and scheduling flop to happen at the airlines, basically, where you kind of drill more at your hometown unit. You can find times to be home and drill and fly and serve. That also provides you, because basically, if you're commuting to your reserve unit, in addition to commuting to your airline job, you're never going to see your family, right? And so if you can do that, and then when you're drilling and serving, you do get to see your family. So that kind of happens around the 3-year mark, if you will.
Yeah.
And then once you make that leap, that's when I really say, like, okay, now's the time that if you want to move to your airline base, now's a good time because you're senior enough. And especially if you're a person hired off the street, most reserve units are going to require you to be almost active duty for 3 to 4 years. I was essentially active duty flying the B-52 in a reserve unit for 5 years before ever really kind of even beginning the airline hiring process.
Yeah, and the reason for that, please correct me if I'm wrong, is because they want you to qualify. There are when you're doing an airline job, you got the 737, you learn how to fly the 737, you get checked out in the 737, and they put you as a first officer next to some captain that's been there for 150 years. And the B-52 or any military aircraft, first thing you do is you get checked out in the aircraft. And then you have to learn mission sets, right? Mission sets are all about what this aircraft is designed to do, whether it's dropping bombs or moving cargo or doing some confined area landings, and it's a lot of studying. It's a lot of extra work that it's way more work than the airline job, right? Like, can you talk to that a little bit? Like, how much of your life is consumed by learning this aircraft?
Yeah, it absolutely, that's a very valid point. I think a lot of times people think reservists are a lesser qualified person, but quite frankly, we hold ourselves to the same standard that anyone flying it on active duty. We just have a lot of times less time to do it. So for most people who can truly be what I would call the weekend warrior, if you will, in a reserve flying unit, and most flying reserve units require a much larger commitment than just 1 weekend a month. It is not the standard reserve profile. But yeah, it was an all out, because I left the Cobra as an instructor and I started back in the right seat as a co-pilot. I basically kind of had to crawl my way up in the ladder of qualifications again, right seat to left seat, and then through the instructor. Meanwhile, I'm interspersing deployments because, so much of operating your aircraft and getting good with it is taking it and doing the mission with it, right? So it was 5 years, but it went by in a snap. It was really a very quick process. But yeah, I was wholly invested in studying my platform, because there really isn't, you can't be half of a B-52 instructor pilot. You can't be half of a B-52 aircraft commander. So you're going to have to basically be capable of doing that. And so really the only guys and girls that really get to make that kind of transition to a purist lifestyle as a reservist, if you will, of flying just a couple of days a month, are the ones that have left active duty flying that specific aircraft and are generally a very seasoned instructor that are making the transition over, after half their career.
Yeah. So definitely be ready for the work and know that that's what you're getting into. I did what you said not to do. I lived in DC and I was flying the H-53, which is a big old helicopter. And I flew that out of Norfolk. And that's about a 4.5 hour drive. And I would have to do that way more than 1 week in a month. It was so much driving and so much work because there was a demand. They expected, if they're going to offer you a position to do this awesome job, they expect you to put out, and they expect a pound of flesh, and you have to stay current and you have to stay good. And if you're not, you're going to be shown the door. And that is tricky. So once you're in, you're not always in. You have to be constantly putting one foot in front of the other. You definitely get to a state of equilibrium where you have the qualifications, and then you are the person that comes to be training the new guys and helping them get better and stuff like that. Then they probably lean on you even more because, like, oh man, we need this guy or we need that guy or that gal. So be ready for a real job. It's not just drinking beer and smoking cigars, though it should definitely be part of it. So sticking with the military, right? Before we put a bow on the military side of the house, when you did that, how many years in the Marine Corps? 12 years? Is that what you said?
It was 8 years, 3 months, 6 days. I only know that very specifically because it was on my DD-214, and you kind of never forget a day in the Marine Corps.
Right. And your DD-214 is that piece of paper, that like get out of jail free card that you get when you leave the military. So you're at 8 years. So you were probably a captain in 2003 in the Marine Corps and almost in 2004, right? So you're mid-career, you're early mid-career, not even mid-career yet. And you're doing it. What if I'm near the end of my career? What if I'm at like 18 years and I've been flying helicopters in the Navy forever, ever, and I want to go do this because I know two things. I know, number one, the helicopter world, if I want to go to the airlines, is never going to pay off. And number two, is I don't want to go on any more deployments on ships in the Navy or in the Marines or anything else, or in the Army. Like, gosh, I don't want to go to Afghanistan again for another year. I want to go and switch over. Do they take people that are more senior? And what's the commitment looking like?
That's a very fascinating question. I didn't leave the Marine Corps because I was angry or I was disenfranchised. It was strictly a family decision, right? And so when it was a decision just to get home to raise a family near my parents, but I wasn't done continuing to serve. I love serving my country. And I think for a lot of people, when they get to that 18-year point, you're so close, but it's happened. I know of a handful of people that have done that transition very late in their career. And really what I would say is a lot of times what's motivating that is a family situation that's driving that decision, right? And so I would say if you want to pursue the transition, especially from one branch of active service to a reserve branch of another service, or even active within the Air Force to the reserve, is you got to find a unit that has a real need. Let's just say if you're flying Vipers out of basically Homestead, or you're flying F-22s out of Hawaii, guess what? Everybody on the planet that's seen Top Gun 1 or 2 is thinking the same thing, right? So everybody's going to be competing.
They're probably thinking, man, what a great Navy movie. I should probably join the Navy.
Right. Yeah, that too. But most of the time, they don't know the difference. They're like F-22, F-14 is all the same thing, right? So in those kind of instances, you're going to have to find a unit that has a real need, that could find somebody has a need for you. And I wouldn't say it's a super easy endeavor to get into. I would say your best bet is to convert within your own community, because basically you're taking senior level experience and transitioning to a part-time job. But that is very valuable. If you're trying to make that transition very late in your career, it's going to have to be a unit that has a lot of need, right? They're short on pilots. And the interesting thing with the airline hiring process right now in reserves is it ebbs and flows, right? You'll have a lot of units flush leaving. Like right now, I don't think I would ever get hired into the B-52 community just because we have so many highly qualified B-52 pilots leaving to go to the airlines and want to make that switch. So you got to find that unit. Sometimes it might be an out of the way location, kind of not close to anything else, that they're having a hard time bringing and recruiting talent into that area, right? If you're at that later stage, that's really what you got to look for.
Yeah. And so it's a little geographic and it's a little aircraft type, right? So the sexier and hotter the aircraft, probably the more people want to fly it and the more competitive it would be to get in there. The less sexy the aircraft, there's probably a bigger need. Anybody listening that's had experience with that, send me an email. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say, and we'll chat about it on the show. You bring up a really good point about continually, like the theme I hear is reach out and find out, and then continue moving forward. So, yeah, I have a friend that he converted from the Navy and the helicopter community over to heavies in the Air Guard, and he never looked back, like loves it every single second of it. And so he's my age, so he's at 22-ish years right now and getting ready to get out. And he had to make a commitment to them and say, yes, I'm not going, because he could have left at 20, but they're going to invest in you. I mean, how much does it cost to learn to fly a B-52? Probably a couple $100s, right?
$9 million to make a brand new co-pilot.
Oh man,
that's from a RAND study. Yeah, so it is a huge investment.
So $9 million, which is, most of you guys have that money in your checking account, so you could just write a check, get called in the B-52. But when you do and you move forward, know that don't force yourself into the position. When you go meet those people, those men and women in the squadron, if it's weird and it's an awkward dynamic, stay the hell away. Don't go, because you're going to be miserable. You're going to be poking your eye out, wishing you never did it. I've seen it, man. So like, find that place where you fit. Go drink some beer with them, go hang out, find out what's new, find out who is cool and who is not, and where you can grow the most. And that's what's up. That's so valuable. All right. So we've been talking for about 25 minutes about this military side of the house. And I don't want to let you go before we talk about what the experience could be like for somebody who's never done it, who's never been a military person, is not transitioning. Maybe they're going through flight school. Maybe they're not. What if I'm 18 years old, I'm getting ready to graduate from high school, and I'm trying to figure out what I need to do, or I'm 22 and I'm getting ready to graduate from college. Like, what does that look like? I mean, like, I grew up in the middle of the mountains in North Carolina, never touched an airplane until I got into the military. So how do I do it? What do I need to think about?
Yeah. One little disclaimer I'll give is, I haven't been through this process myself. So having not lived this reality, I don't have the most resident level of expertise, but I've seen it done a number of times. I do know people that have. And I would encourage you to bring someone on the show at some point in the future that has been through that process. But the thing I will tell you too, and the other thing I'll say before I step onto this is, I've never heard anyone ever say, I wish I had not joined the Air Force Reserve. I've never heard anybody say that statement. So like, for all the challenges and all the difficulties that it presents, everybody is very happy when they make that switch over. But yeah, so to your point, like, I would say it's one of the best kept secrets in the military is that you can be Johnny or Jane college student, semi-interested in aviation and basically no flight experience, and then compete, get hired by a reserve unit, and then become a pilot in the Air Force Reserve or Air National Guard. Quite frankly, I didn't know that was a thing at the time. I would not have changed anything about how I went. I chose the Marine Corps. I wanted to be there, but it's still very fascinating that you can do it. Now, I will tell you that things that sound too good to be true are very competitive to get into, right? For a lot of units, you have to, I'll tell you from the guys and gals that I know that have done it and been successful, you kind of have to commit to it. And aviation experience is very valuable to the Air Force. I would say by and large, the preponderance of people that do get hired have at least a initial outlay of some type of flight experience, some on the high end, some on the low end. And so that generally is the process. But a lot of them go on the road, traveling the country and interviewing with these different units. And what I would also say is a huge difference. So the rock star college student, 4.0s, really high grade averages, doesn't necessarily have to be 4.0, but flight experience, all the tenets that you would want to see in an academy graduate, right? And then a little bit beyond. A lot of them have masters and high-end students.
What if you're like me and you're 2.0 and go?
Well, so here's the thing. A more common pipeline is hiring from within the unit. I mean, we have more prior crew chiefs and prior enlisted people that serve in the unit. So like, a lot of people, they join our wing and they're a crew chief or they're around the airplane in some capacity, and sometimes they're not. We've got prior enlisted med tech become leaders in the wing. So the path I would say is get involved with a wing where you want to serve with an aircraft that you like to fly, and then go hang around with the pilots. It turns out we're pretty easy to talk to, right? I went to a local college and did a recruiting thing, and I met some reservist crew chiefs there, and we've had them in the simulator now. And so all too often, we're very excited to kind of promote from within our own command structure, because one, we get a really good look at you and say like, hey, you're a squared away individual. You're committed to our unit. So you have all the tenets of what we really desire. So I would say that is actually a more common path than the guy or gal off the street, unknown entity, stellar resume, right? Especially some of these more competitive units. That is really the way to get your foot in the door, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's really smart. If you're 18 to 25, if you're in that zone and this is an interest, this is a dream, the idea of getting yourself in there by enlisting, right? Anybody that grew up like I grew up, you have no idea what I'm talking about. So to be a pilot in the Air Guard or the Air Force, like, you have to be an officer. To be an officer, you have to have a college degree. That is just one of the things you need. And so to get that, like, as you're making your way toward that degree, if you want to fly, you want to like target a fighter squadron or whatever, go to that squadron and look at enlisting in. Enlisting is for anybody. You have to have a high school diploma. That's it. You can enlist and you can go to that squadron and say, hey, look, I want to load bombs. I want to do this. I want to do maintenance. Find the thing that you want to do and be a person that helps there. And that shows, first off, that you're dedicated and committed. That is the first thing it shows. And the second is you become that known quantity in the squadron. They know that old Nick over there has been a great wrench turner or a great crew chief. He's always willing to fly wherever, or he's always willing to stay late and work on the aircraft or whatever. And then you start the conversation about, my real dream is to be a pilot. And to do that, right, as you're cranking through college and you're doing this job on the side, first off, you're getting paid. Second off, it's way better than being a sandwich artist at Subway. But you could certainly parlay your college degree and the end of your first commitment as an enlisted person. You don't even have to get to the end of it. You can apply to become an officer and work through the squadron parameters. You're already there with a foot in the door. And so getting to that position, putting yourself in a place where you can succeed, is called playing the long game. And if you are playing the long game, you are going to have way more success than if you just cold call a squadron, especially if you want to go fly Fat Amy in the JSF squadron. So does everybody else. And so
right.
That's where you build your network. And that's so important. And you keep hearing me talk about your network and how it's important and all those things. And this is just it. This is how Aaron and I got together. I didn't know Aaron. My network connected us together so that we could bring this to you.
Absolutely.
Man, that is so smart. That is such a good, I'm sure the people doing it right now, if you're doing it right now, hit me up. If you are enlisted with an officer package in and you want to go fly something, I want to talk to you. I think that'd be super cool. Podcast at spitfireelite.com. It's such a smart move. And one of the other things, I think this is kind of my last point, is if I wanted to commit real hard, how many hours a year am I going to be getting in the B-52 after about 24 months? Like, what do you think that's going to look like?
Well, it's a very unique question. If flight time is your metric that you are targeting most, your mobility platforms is where it's at, hands down. Like your tanker units, your C-17s, your C-130 units, those guys and gals are on the road a good bit. They are doing the Lord's work all over the globe. And so they are building flight time rapidly, right? A strategic asset like a B-52, you do get a good amount of flight time, but it's not in the same category. So I'll give you a case in point. I had a guy, Huey's in the Marine Corps, transition to tankers, and I think he left about a year and a half after me, and he got to the airlines almost a year and a half before me because he just was able to deploy and build so much more time. That was me still actively trying to fly. So I would say on average, if you're making yourself available and you don't have any issues where you have medical issues, you can't fly for a longer period of time, I'd say about 300 hours is pretty good. The thing too is reservists, depending on how tied in your unit is, our flying hour budgets, meaning like how many hours the Air Force allocates to our unit annually, is not as high as, say, an active duty unit, right? It's so unique to the individual unit. And then on the low end, your fighter units, they're flying 0.8s to 1.5s and some 2.0s every now and then, but they're flying more often, but they fly shorter duration. So I would say that they probably build time, probably commensurate somewhat with the B-52 in that 200 to 300 hour category, or maybe more depending on how much the unit flies and what their mission is.
Yeah. So the point I want to drive home here is for those of you that are seeing the brass ring and seeing all the cool thing is like the military, we fly less because there's way more stuff to do. We're not just doing one flight, then the next flight, then the next flight. We're not doing 5 legs a day, going to the hotel and blah, blah, blah. We are certainly spending a lot of time pre-flighting, pre-mission planning, debriefing, all those things. They take time. And so you're going to come out at the end of the year with a few hundred hours, and which is great. But seriously, 300 hours it's a pretty good year. And if you are a fighter guy, 200 hours is a really good year. So if you're trying to push your way forward to get your ATP, this is not a primary thing if you're trying to do it fast. This is the long game. And so I would certainly consider how you're going to make it best for your family and how you're going to go down that road, because that's important. And you need to be eyes wide open ahead of time that this is a slow road to hours. We're not doing this for hours. We're doing this it's certainly more checks in the block for an application and things like that, but it's not a primary discriminator. So thank you for mentioning that. All right. So I am super interested in going to fly the B-52 and I want to go do it. So how do I get in touch with you to get more information? What do I need to do?
So I can put my contact information with you and then I can connect if you're interested. What I'll do is I'll get the latest hiring personnel at some of the reserve units that we've got around. So we've got a combat coded unit that has people, that's their job, right? Their job is the hiring team, if you will. So they're the ones that you're going to liaison with. And the biggest thing I would tell you is don't take no for an answer, right? It's like trying to get yourself published or anything else, right? You're going to get a lot of no's along the way. But eventually you're going to find some unit that will say yes, right? There's some reserve unit somewhere that has a need and you just need help. They're looking for you too, right? So don't take rejection as across the board. Another thing I will tell you too, and I did this as a young age, is there's a lot of things that you can do and efforts you can put into. But one of the things that I always hate to see is when someone gets cut out of the pipeline because they have a medical issue or something they didn't find out. So if you're pursuing aviation as a career, go get you a Class 1 flight physical. Go get online and find out about the aeromedical waiver guides in the Air Force, because it is more stringent, right? Like anything, right? Time is ticking in a career path, in a career pipeline. And so figure out very early on if you can. When I was 14, I went and printed out I think it was like the Naval Medical Guide, and I took it to my mom and said, hey, I need to go to a doctor and get checked out for all these things. I know it's kind of weird for a 14-year-old, but I was like, I don't want to waste any time if they're just going to tell me no in 4 or 5 years, right? It's a commitment, right? And so if you're going to dream this dream, know if it's a dream that's in your world.
That's the most
right?
Marine Corps thing I've ever heard. You're amazing.
I was running and doing push-ups and pull-ups too. I was getting ready already.
Man, that's what I'm talking about. Dude, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Don't take no for an answer. Do keep digging. And if you've encountered something in life that's hard to talk about, or something that you feel like keeps you from being a success, that is something that can be overcome. And there's seriously, just about anything. And whether it's arrests, bad things in the military happening to you, or medical things that you have gotten waivers for and stuff like that, like there are ways to climb the mountain. Incumbent upon you to know the rules and find where the loopholes are set up, whatever exceptions there are, and lean on that, because nobody knows the rules better than you when you're doing this. So you need to make sure that you know all this ahead of time, because if somebody wants to hire you, but you have something that's holding you up, you need to be able to say, oh, well, sign here, here, and here. We provide this form here, and then we ship it out, and then they'll agree to it. And that's how it works. Because if you don't know, they're not going to look for you. You have to be in charge of your own destiny. Man, that was a really good point, dude. Thank you for bringing that up. Dude, Aaron Bohl, thank you so much for being on Ready for Pushback. I'm so stoked that you gave this great information, and I really hope that the pilot came away knowing that this is something worthwhile and something super cool. So thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be here. And any way I can pay it forward, I'm happy to do it.
Hey, before you jump out of here and go on to the next podcast, can I ask a big favor? Would you mind going over to your app that you're listening to this podcast on and give me a review? Give me a 5-star review if you love it. Give me a 1-star review if it totally sucks. Put a comment in there, something that is helpful. It helps me. It helps get the word out there. It helps people find the podcast, and that's super cool. If you don't do that, maybe you could just share the podcast with a friend. Tell a buddy who's trying to figure it out, trying to sort out this pilot dream of theirs and get a little bit further. That is super awesome as well. Last, if you don't do either of those two things, how about this? Find a way today to make yourself 1% better. Do that thing that you've been putting off. Put your foot forward, make movement, get yourself going, get that inertia that you need to succeed in this industry. So that's your choice. Leave a review, tell a friend, or make yourself better. Either way, it's all a good choice. And I'm super stoked you're listening, and I will see you on the next episode. The statements made on this show are my own opinions and do not reflect, nor are they under any direction from my employer.